My stepbrother stole his own college fund and framed me for it, making my entire family disown me. 4 years later, he begged me to save his daughter's life, so I made him confess the truth in front of everyone. 4 years ago, I, 26M, was accused of stealing my stepbrother's college fund. My family sided with him and kicked me out. Now he needs my help for his kid's medical treatment. I never had a good relationship with my stepbrother Ryan, 24M. Everything changed in my life after my dad passed away in a car accident when I was 10. It was just me and my mom for 2 years, and we were really close. She was my best friend, my support system, my everything. Then she met John at some work conference when I was 12, and within 6 months, they got married. I was okay with it because John seemed nice at first, and my mom was happy again after a long time. But then Ryan came to live with us. He was John's son from his previous marriage and had been living with his mom until she got remarried and moved to a different state. Ryan was 10 at the time, and from day one, he made it clear that he didn't like me or my mom. He'd give us these cold looks when John wasn't around and act like the perfect son when John was present. At first, it was just small things. He'd mess up the house and blame it on me. He'd eat all the snacks I'd saved for later and tell John the first was lying when I confronted him. Once he broke an expensive vase while running around the house and told John the first pushed him. Another time, he broke a window while playing baseball and somehow convinced John that I was the one who threw the ball. But what really bothered me was how he'd try to manipulate my mom. He'd tell her I was mean to him when she wasn't around, that I'd threaten him and bully him. He'd even cry sometimes, putting on this whole act about how scared he was of me. None of that was true. I mostly tried to avoid him because I knew he was trouble. My mom usually didn't believe his stories because she knew what kind of kid I was. I'd always been quiet, kept to myself, got good grades, never caused any trouble. But John always sided with Ryan, no matter what. This created a lot of tension between my mom and John. They'd have these long arguments late at night when they thought I couldn't hear. John would accuse my mom of being biased against Ryan, and my mom would defend me, saying Ryan was making things up. But over time, I could see my mom getting worn down by all the fighting. She started second-guessing herself, questioning whether she was being fair to Ryan. Things got worse when we were teenagers. Ryan started hanging out with this group of kids who were known troublemakers. He'd skip school, come home drunk, throw parties when our parents were away. But somehow, he always managed to twist the story and make it seem like I was the bad influence. If he got caught drinking, he'd say I was the one who bought the alcohol. If he skipped school, he'd claim I pressured him into it. John would ground both of us even though I had nothing to do with Ryan's behavior. I'd try to explain, show them my perfect attendance record, my good grades, but John would say I was just better at not getting caught. My mom tried to defend me at first, but John would get angry and say she was letting me get away with everything because I was her biological son. By the time I was in high school, I'd learned to just keep my head down and stay out of Ryan's way. I focused on my studies, got a part-time job at a local bookstore, and spent most of my time either at work or at my best friend Mark's house. Mark was the only one who knew what was really going on. He'd seen how Ryan acted when adults weren't around, heard the things he'd say to me. Ryan's behavior got even worse after he failed to get into any good colleges. He was smart enough, but he'd spent so much time partying that his grades were terrible. Meanwhile, I got accepted into a good state university with a partial scholarship. I could see how much this bothered him, how he'd glare at me whenever college was mentioned. The real trouble started 4 years ago. Ryan had a college fund worth about $80,000 that his grandparents had set up for him when he was born. After taking a gap year and claiming he'd changed, he was supposed to start community college that fall and then transfer to a better school if his grades were good. His grandparents had agreed to let him use the fund for this. One day, John was checking the account to start arranging the tuition payments and discovered that all the money was gone. There had been several large transfers over the past few months, emptying the account completely. Ryan immediately accused me of stealing it. He claimed he'd seen me sneaking around John's office where he kept important documents. He said I must have found the account details and transferred the money to myself because I was jealous that he had a college fund and I didn't. I was shocked. I had no idea about any of this. I told them to check the bank records, talk to the bank, file a police report, anything to prove my innocence. I even offered to show them my bank statements. But Ryan had thought it through. He'd already set up fake evidence. He'd created a fake email trail showing I'd been asking about ways to transfer large sums of money. He'd even planted a USB drive in my room with screenshots of the bank account and documents showing how to access it. The worst part was that my mom believed him this time. I think it was because the evidence seemed so convincing and because she was tired of always having to defend me against John. When she looked at me that day, it was like she was seeing a stranger. She told me she was disappointed in me and that she couldn't believe I'd do something like this. That hurt more than anything else. My own mother, who'd raised me alone for 2 years, who knew me better than anyone, choosing to believe Ryan's lies. John was furious. He said he'd always known I was trouble, that I'd been jealous of Ryan from the start. He kicked me out that same day, telling me I had an hour to pack my things and leave. I tried to explain, to defend myself, but no one would listen. My mom just stood there crying while John yelled at me to get out of his house. I was 22, had just finished college, and was suddenly homeless. I had some savings from my part-time jobs, but it wasn't much. Thank God for Mark, he let me crash on his couch while I looked for work. It took me 3 months to find a decent job in IT and another 2 months to save enough for a small apartment. Those first few months were the hardest of my life. I lost my entire family in one day. My mom wouldn't take my calls. John had blocked my number. Even my aunts and uncles believed I was a thief. Ryan had made sure to tell everyone his version of the story. The only people who stood by me were Mark and his family. They knew what kind of person I was and never doubted me for a second. But I didn't let it break me. I worked hard, stayed late at the office, took every training opportunity I could find. Got promotions, switched to a better company, and now I'm doing pretty well for myself. I'm a project manager at a tech firm, have my own house, and live a comfortable life. I went completely no contact with my family. Changed my number, moved to a different city, blocked them on social media. The only person who knew how to reach me was Mark. Update 1, 2 weeks later. It has been a long 4 years and I am writing this update because something interesting happened. After 4 years of no contact, Ryan suddenly reached out to me through Mark last week. It came as a complete shock because I'd worked so hard to disappear from my family's radar. I'd changed my number, moved cities, blocked everyone on social media. The only person who knew how to reach me was Mark. At first, Mark didn't tell me about Ryan's attempts to contact me. Apparently, Ryan had been desperately trying to track me down for weeks. He'd gone to my old workplace, asked around in my old neighborhood, and even tried reaching out to my college friends on social media. Mark kept shutting him down. He knew how hard I'd worked to build a new life away from my family. But then Ryan told Mark why he needed to talk to me so urgently, and Mark decided I should know. Ryan's 2-year-old daughter Emma has a serious heart condition. She was born with a congenital heart defect that was manageable at first, but now requires immediate surgery. The doctors found that the hole in her heart is getting bigger, and without surgery, her condition will keep deteriorating. The total cost of the surgery is around $150,000. Their insurance will cover about half, but Ryan needs to come up with the rest. He's already been denied loans from multiple banks because of his poor credit history. When Mark first told me about Emma, I didn't want to get involved. Ryan had destroyed my relationship with my family once, and I'd spent 4 years building a new life for myself. But Mark said Ryan sounded truly desperate, and kept calling him multiple times a day. After thinking about it for a few days, I agreed to meet Ryan at my office. I chose my office deliberately. I wanted him to see how well I was doing despite what he'd done to me. When he walked in, I barely recognized him. The arrogant stepbrother who'd made my life hell was gone. Instead, there was this broken man, hadn't shaved in days, dark circles under his eyes, wearing wrinkled clothes that looked like he'd slept in them. The moment I closed my office door, he fell to his knees and started begging. Right there, in front of my desk, crying so hard he could barely speak. He told me he'd tried everything: loans, crowdfunding, selling his car and house, asking everyone he knew for help. He'd managed to raise about $30,000, but he was still short by $70,000. The surgery needs to happen within 2 months, or Emma's heart could be permanently damaged. He kept saying he knew he didn't deserve my help, that he was a terrible person, but this wasn't about him, it was about Emma. Then he pulled out his phone and showed me Emma's picture. She was this tiny thing in a hospital bed, hooked up to monitors, but still smiling at the camera. He told me about her condition, how she gets tired just from walking across a room, how she can't play with other kids because she gets out of breath so easily. I sat there for a long time, just looking at him. This person who'd lied about me for years, who'd turned my family against me, who'd cost me my relationship with my mom, now sitting in my office, begging for help. I thought about all the nights I'd spent on Mark's couch, applying for jobs during the day and crying myself to sleep at night. I thought about my mom's face when she told me she was disappointed in me. I thought about all the family events I'd missed, all the holidays I'd spent alone these past 4 years. But then I looked at Emma's picture again. She's innocent in all this. She doesn't deserve to suffer because her father is a terrible person. After what felt like hours but was probably just minutes, I made my decision. I told Ryan I'd help, but on one condition: he had to tell the entire family the truth about the college fund. He had to admit that he was the one who took the money and framed me. The color drained from his face when I said this. He started stammering, trying to find a way around it. He offered to pay me back eventually, said he'd sign a contract, asked if there was anything else I wanted instead. But I stood firm. I told him that if he wanted my help, he had to come clean to everyone: Mom, John, his grandparents, our aunts and uncles, everyone who'd believed his lies about me 4 years ago. He had to tell them exactly what he did with the money, how he'd framed me, and why he did it. Only after he'd done that would I transfer the money for Emma's surgery. He sat there for a long time, staring at the floor. I could see him struggling with the decision. Finally, he looked up and agreed. He said he'd tell everyone the truth if I helped Emma. I made it clear that I'd transfer the money directly to the hospital, not to him, and only after he'd confessed to everyone. He asked for a few days to gather the family. Before he left, he tried to apologize again. Said he thinks about what he did to me every day, that seeing me successful now makes him realize how much he'd messed up. I didn't respond to that. I just told him to let me know when he'd arranged the family meeting. After he left, I called Mark. He thinks I'm being too nice, that Ryan doesn't deserve my help after everything he put me through these past 4 years. He reminded me of all the times Ryan had lied about me, all the ways he'd tried to ruin my life even before the college fund incident. Maybe Mark is right. Maybe I am being too forgiving. But this isn't about forgiving Ryan. This is about helping an innocent child who just happened to be born to a terrible father. And if I'm honest, it's also about finally getting the truth out. I want my mom to know what kind of person she chose to believe over her own son. I want John to know how his perfect son lied to him. I want everyone who called me a thief to know the truth. Ryan texted later to say he'd arranged the family meeting for next weekend. Now I just have to prepare myself to face my family again after 4 years. I'm not looking forward to it, but at least this time, I'll be the one in control. Update 2, 1 week later. The family meeting happened yesterday at my mom and John's house. I almost didn't go. Sitting in my car outside their house, all the old memories came flooding back. The last time I'd been there was the day John kicked me out. Mark came with me for support, and I'm glad he did because I couldn't have handled it alone. Walking into that house after 4 years felt surreal. Everything looked exactly the same furniture, same family photos on the walls, though I noticed all the ones with me and them were gone. Everyone was already there in the living room, my mom, John, Ryan, my aunts and uncles, even Ryan's grandparents who had set up the college fund. My mom started crying the moment she saw me. She tried to hug me but I stepped back. John looked older, more gray in his hair. He tried to say something too, but I cut him off. I told them I was only there for one reason, to hear Ryan tell the truth. Ryan looked like he was going to be sick. He was sweating and shaking. Twice he looked at me like he was hoping I'd change my mind, but I just stared back. Finally, he started talking. He told them everything. How he'd spent the college fund during his gap year on parties, drugs, and his girlfriend at the time. He'd gotten access to the account by stealing John's documents when everyone was asleep. When his dad discovered the money was gone, he panicked and decided to blame me. He explained in detail how he'd created the fake emails, how he'd planted the USB drive in my room, how he'd chosen me because everyone already thought I was a troublemaker thanks to his years of lies. Then came the part that really shocked everyone. He admitted that all the stories he'd told about me over the years, about me bullying him, threatening him, being a bad influence, were all lies. He'd made them up because he was jealous. Jealous that I got good grades while he struggled, jealous that my mom always defended me, jealous that I got into a good college while he couldn't. The silence after his confession was deafening. His grandmother was the first to react. She burst into tears. John looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. My aunts and uncles were all staring at Ryan in shock. But I was watching my mom. She had this horrible look of realization on her face. All those years of doubting me, of believing Ryan's lies, of letting John kick me out, it was all hitting her at once. She started sobbing, saying my name over and over. Then everyone started talking at once. John was yelling at Ryan, asking how he could do this to his own family. Ryan's grandparents were saying they couldn't believe he'd blown through all that money and then blamed an innocent person. My aunts and uncles were all trying to apologize to me at once. But I wasn't interested in any of it. I took out my phone, pulled up my banking app, and transferred the money to the hospital account Ryan had given me. The moment the transfer was confirmed, I got up to leave. My mom tried to stop me. She was crying, grabbing my arm, saying she was sorry, that she should have believed me, that she'd failed as a mother. John tried to apologize too. He said he'd write me a check for double the college fund amount, that he'd make it up to me somehow. Ryan was still sitting there crying, saying he'd spend the rest of his life trying to make amends. I looked at all of them, my mom who'd chosen her new husband over her own son, John who'd kicked out a 22-year-old without a second thought, Ryan who'd ruined my life because he was jealous. 4 years ago, I would have given anything to hear them apologize. But now? Their words meant nothing. I just walked out. Mark followed me, and we drove home in silence. When we got to my place, he asked if I was okay. I told him I'd never felt better. For 4 years, I'd carried the weight of their betrayal. Now they had to carry the weight of their guilt. Ryan texted later to say the hospital received the money and Emma's surgery is scheduled for next month. He thanked me and said he'd spend the rest of his life trying to make it up to me. I blocked his number. My mom has been calling and texting nonstop since yesterday. John too. Even my aunts and uncles are trying to reach out. I've blocked them all. They had 4 years to figure out the truth, to question Ryan's story, to reach out to me. Instead, they believe the worst about me without a second thought. Now they can live with that knowledge for the rest of their lives. Mark thinks I should at least talk to my mom, says she seems genuinely sorry. But sorry doesn't make up for 4 years of betrayal. Sorry doesn't give me back the family I lost, the relationships that were destroyed, the trust that was broken. Some things you just can't fix with an apology. Update 3, 2 months later. Emma's surgery was successful. Mark heard it from Ryan last week. Apparently the doctors were able to repair the hole in her heart completely. I'm glad she's okay, even though I haven't responded to any updates about her condition. She was innocent in all this, and that's the only reason I helped. My family hasn't stopped trying to contact me. My mom sends daily emails, each one longer than the last. She writes about how she cries herself to sleep every night thinking about what I went through, how she'll never forgive herself for not believing me, how she misses me more than anything. Yesterday she sent pictures of me from when I was little, saying she looks at them every day now. John sent a check for $80,000 to my office last week, the exact amount of the college fund. When I returned it, he sent another for $160,000, with a note saying it was to make up for the 4 years of interest and pain. I returned that one too. Then he tried sending it to Mark to give to me. Mark sent it back without telling me, knowing I wouldn't want it. Ryan's grandparents showed up at my office building 3 times. I had security turn them away each time. They left letters saying they felt responsible for everything because it was their money that Ryan stole. They said they should have done more to verify what happened instead of just believing Ryan. My aunts and uncles keep trying to reach me through every possible channel, LinkedIn, work email, even trying to message me on gaming platforms they somehow found I use. One aunt even tried to apply for a job at my company just to talk to me. My uncle posted a public apology on Facebook, tagging all our mutual friends. Mark says the whole family seems to be falling apart since Ryan's confession. My mom and John are barely speaking. She blames him for kicking me out, and he blames her for not standing up to him. Ryan's grandparents have cut him off completely. The aunts and uncles are taking sides, some saying we should all move past this, others saying they can never forgive Ryan. Ryan apparently moved back in with his mom in another state after Emma's surgery. Mark heard he lost his job because he kept breaking down at work, talking about how he ruined his stepbrother's life. His ex-wife won't let him see Emma except under supervision because of his unstable behavior. Part of me feels bad for him, but then I remember those 4 years I spent rebuilding my life from nothing. Mark thinks I should at least talk to my mom, says she seems genuinely broken. He showed me a video she sent him. She was crying, saying she'd give anything for just 5 minutes with me. But every time I think about maybe calling her, I remember how she looked at me that day 4 years ago. How she stood there while John kicked me out. How she changed her number when I tried to call her in those first few months. I got another promotion at work last week. I'm now heading an entire department. 4 years ago, when I was sleeping on Mark's couch, I never imagined I'd make it this far. I did this all on my own, without any help from family. I'm looking at houses in Seattle now. My company is opening a new office there, and they want me to head it. It would mean moving even further away from my family, which honestly sounds perfect. Maybe someday I'll feel differently about all this. Maybe someday I'll want to have a relationship with my mom again, or listen to John's apologies, or hear about Emma from Ryan himself instead of through Mark. But right now, I'm happy with my life exactly as it is, peaceful, successful, and family-free. After all, they say the best revenge is living well. I'm just glad I finally got to show them exactly how well I can live without them.